So this week we're talking about political influences on our food safety system, on our series of laws that we have. And it seems like a very natural topic to begin with because we have this political system that creates our series of laws. So there would be no Food and Drug and Cosmetic Act without Congress, and Congress would not be what they are without politics. We also have a series of regulations that follow from what Congress passes. So Congress does its piece, and then it becomes a statute, and then from there, there's a series of regulations. We're all familiar with lobbying and the influence that that can have on our series of laws. That's a political influence. So we have this series from going from statute to regulation, from regulation to implementation, from implementation to enforcement. And we can have political influence along the chain there, either from interest in Congress, interest in lobbying, or some combination of the two. When we talk about statutes, when we talk about Congress and its part, we have to remember that all politics is local. So if we have a congressman that's from an agricultural district, say in Iowa, they may have an interest in that particular area of food safety law or having an ease of regulation or exemption or something of that nature for that particular product. Same could be true for a Congress member with a district that's maybe relying on fishing or seafood or manufacturing in certain ways. So Minnesota or some of these other districts where there's a lot of manufacturing that's done, we can see a particular interest and a particular desire for the regulations to come out a certain way. What's interesting and why I don't have any props at this week is that a lot of what we can talk about with political influence can be unseen. It can be behind the scenes in committee meetings and committee hearings, things that we don't see, lobbying and meetings that we're not aware of, and also in products that we're not seeing. So we could bring out products and maybe talk about nutrition facts panels and ingredient labeling and ingredients that are allowed and not allowed, BVO, aspartame. These are all examples of ingredients that are there, perhaps because of political influence, or maybe it's a lack of social or economic influence that's occurring, or some imbalance there. But we can also talk about what's missing. So some common examples that we could say are due maybe to a political influence or a political interpretation. We can take something like kratom. It's a plant-based dietary ingredient, or should potentially be a dietary ingredient. That's been one of the issues that it's had, is that the FDA has determined it's not suitable under the statutory definition in 201FF, doesn't meet the criteria for dietary ingredient, and it's only used for either illicit purposes or for drug purposes. You may not be aware of that, and that's something new for you to learn about. If you are involved in that community, it's a very politically active community seeking changes at the state level and seeking changes at the FDA level. So if you're part of that community, you're aware of it, and you're working to exert that political influence. And some would say there's a corresponding political influence at the FDA. FDA, of all the dietary ingredients that it could choose from to seek enforcement against or take steps against, it is really focused on kratom, seeing it as sort of a drug similar to opiates or others that are very serious public health concern, taking very serious steps all the way from the commissioner on down to effectively work to ban the substance because it's largely imported. Is that a political influence? Is that a social influence? Is it an economic one? It can be hard to say exactly, and it depends on what side of the table you're looking at. If you're looking at it from the kratom community, it could look political because there's not really an economic or social justification for it. Maybe public health is its own justification, but that can be an example where we're not seeing a product or we're seeing less of a product, and that's due to political influence. Maybe a less controversial example would be raw milk. We don't have raw milk in our fridges. We don't see it in our grocery stores to a large point. There should be some sales potentially in a local area, but there really should be no sales of raw milk. And if you're in the raw milk community, there's a real political drive. There's a real desire to see a change in the law to allow that product to happen. And there's a corresponding push from FDA to ensure that that isn't a product that's available on the market. And again, is that push social, economic? Is it political? It may depend on what side of the table you're on. So these political influences are things that we don't see, and they can also be things that we're less familiar with because of the time in history. So there are areas of food law or food regulation that don't necessarily tie into adulteration or misbranding, and we can get into examples like rationing or victory gardens, where the FDA or some other government agency, maybe even just the executive branch on its own, is restricting food supply or stipulating certain uh, uses of food supply. More use for military, less use domestically of certain ingredients, telling what you can and cannot eat in a more direct way. We get into this a little bit when we talk about menu labeling or comments on obesity and trying to regulate what people eat from a health perspective for obesity, but we don't see it to the same level that maybe people in Britain or Europe saw with rationing. We see it a little bit here in that period of time for World War I and II. But that could be a way where politics is intersecting with food in a way that we don't normally talk about. We're really focused on adulteration and misbranding, and this could be other examples. So our main focus this week is going to not be on the things that we can't see, but on the things that we can see. So we're going to continue into the discussion board with a discussion of aspartame. I encourage you to look at aspartame and see if there are other examples. We can look at BVO, brominated vegetable oil, partially hydrogenated fats. So we'll continue this week into the discussion board, keep up with the reading assignments and the new assignment that was issued last week. And as always, if you have any questions, send me an email or schedule a call with me.